The communist government of the former Soviet Union thought that by controlling access to information, they could keep their citizens in line. Consistent with the Orwellian nature of the Soviet Union, the country's most important newspaper was Pravda. Pravda is the Russian word for truth. But Pravda was not truth. It was full of lies. But here's the thing. Almost no one in the Soviet Union was fooled. They knew they were being lied to. Ironically, unlike most citizens in the Soviet Union, citizens in 21st century America are fooled by their news media. We think we're getting the real story from our major media, but we're not. When we tune into the networks or read the New York Times or the Washington Post, we're actually getting a sharply slanted version of the news. Slanted to the left. This should deeply concern people on both sides of the political divide. To make informed decisions, a free society needs a press it can trust, not one that is hopelessly biased. In 2017, Project Veritas sent out undercover reporters to see how committed the major media was to objective news gathering, specifically as it regarded the newly elected president, Donald Trump. Our first report focused on CNN. A producer there, John Bonifield, acknowledged the lack of evidence for his network's efforts to link the Trump campaign and the Russian government in a plot to rig the 2016 election. Bonifield told us, "I think the president is probably right to say, look, you are witch hunting me. You have no smoking gun. You have no real proof." So why was CNN so relentless in hammering the Russia collusion narrative? Ideology, the election wasn't legitimate, and ratings. As Bonifield noted, the Trump-Russia collusion story was good for business. Next, we released another series of reports, these on the New York Times. First, we heard from Nick Dudick, the paper's audience strategy editor. Dudick told our undercover reporter he was responsible for choosing which New York Times videos go on Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram. Dudick boasted, "My imprint is on every video we do." And what was that imprint about? As Dudick, who worked on both the Obama and Hillary Clinton campaigns, told our reporter, he hoped to use his position to make the president's life as difficult as possible. "I will be objective," he told our reporter with undisguised sarcasm before revealing his true intentions. "No, I'm not. That's why I'm here." Dudick told us he returned to journalism precisely in order to remain politically active. Next, we met Des Shu, an editor for the paper. She made it clear where she stood. "I think one of the things that maybe journalists were thinking about is if we write about Trump and how insanely crazy he is and how ludicrous his policies are, then maybe people will read it and be like, oh wow, we shouldn't vote for him." According to the Times' own handbook on journalistic ethics, journalists may not do anything that damages the Times' reputation for strict neutrality in reporting on politics and government. So given such a breach of the Times' own standards, we expected the newspaper to come down hard on Dudick and Shu. Instead, they came down hard on us. Executive editor Dean Baquet said I was a despicable person for recording one of his employees telling the truth. Yet, when the Times publicized a 2012 undercover video of Republican presidential candidate Mitt Romney saying that 47% of Americans wouldn't vote for him because they were dependent on the government, they praised it as offering a rare glimpse of Romney's personal views. In fact, in his attack on us, Baquet unwittingly gave the whole American media game away. A real journalist, he told a panel at the National Press Club, has to have in his or her heart a desire to make society better. The Times' editor is wrong. Real journalists want to pursue the truth. Then they let the citizens use that truth to build a better society. When journalists shape news to fit their vision of a better society, they're not doing their job. Perhaps this wouldn't be so bad if the major media would just admit their political motives. But they don't. On behalf of their own narrow agenda, they lie, distort, and exaggerate. and they expect us to call it Pravda. But with each passing day, fewer and fewer Americans are willing to do so. I'm James O'Keefe, founder and president of Project Veritas for Prager University.
Trust in the media is at an all-time low, and for good reason. We in the business of journalism have exempted ourselves from the normal rules that used to govern us, and so the most egregious kinds of reporting errors are becoming more common. Formerly well-respected news organizations and experienced national reporters are making the sorts of mistakes that wouldn't be tolerated in journalism school. When these mistakes are corrected at all, it's with seemingly little regret. And the corrections never get anywhere near as much attention as the original salacious but incorrect narrative. How do we get here? I discuss that in detail in my book, The Smear. Here are 3 factors. First, firewalls that once strictly separated news from opinion have been replaced by hopelessly blurred lines. Once forbidden practices such as editorializing within straight news reports and the inclusion of opinions as if fact are not only tolerated, they're encouraged. The result, it's never been harder for Americans to separate news that's real from news that's not. Example, May 14, 2016, 10 days after Donald Trump became the Republican presidential nominee, the New York Times published a blockbuster article titled, "Crossing the Line, How Donald Trump Behaved with Women in Private." The story's authors, Michael Barbaro and Megan Twohey, interviewed Roanne Lane, an ex-girlfriend of Trump's. Her quotes made Trump sound at best like a jerk and at worst like a predator. The reporters went so far as to provide their own quotes for the story, presenting their personal commentary as if it were established fact, writing, "This is the public treatment of some women by Mr. Trump. Degrading, impersonal, performed." The problem is the reporting wasn't true, according to Trump's supposed victim. Once the story was published, she publicly accused the Times of misleading her, writing a hit piece against Trump, and putting a negative connotation on what she said was not a negative experience. No matter where you stand, this was a huge development in terms of journalism. The main source behind front-page national news discredited the entire premise of the story. You'd expect something like that to rock the whole news organization and prompt investigations, a retraction, and re-examination of policies. Yet I can find no record of any of that. The Times and their reporters never even apologized or printed a correction. Second, though we may personally like or dislike a politician, as journalists we're obligated to treat them the same. Too often, that's not the case. For example, in May 2008, then presidential candidate Barack Obama said he had visited 57 states. Since there are only 50 states, everyone knew what he meant. He meant to say that he had visited 47 states. The remark, nothing more than a verbal gaffe, drew little attention, and it didn't deserve more. But when Sarah Palin made a comparable gaffe saying, "We've got to stand with our North Korean allies," she was relentlessly ridiculed and mocked in the media, even though everyone knew she meant to say South Korean allies. Third, too many of us have allowed ourselves to become tools of politicians and spinmeisters, often in order to get something in return. I call this transactional journalism. Example, emails show in July 2009, the Atlantic reporter Mark Ambinder was promised a scoop. He'd get an advanced copy of a speech by then Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, but only if he followed certain conditions, as privately dictated by Clinton aide Philippe Rines. Rines emailed Ambinder precise instructions, including, "Describe Clinton's voice as muscular," and "Don't say you were blackmailed," by which Clinton aide Rines obviously meant, "Don't reveal our arrangement." "Got it," replied Ambinder. His resulting article reads in part, "When you think of President Obama's foreign policy, think of Secretary of State Hillary Clinton. That's the message behind a muscular speech that Clinton is set to deliver today." That Ambinder, then considered a serious journalist, would allegedly violate basic ethics for such a minor story speaks volumes about the state of today's news media. For the record, Ambinder defended himself by saying that he found Clinton's speech to be muscular, so the adjective was appropriate. I think most Americans would like to believe their news is factual, well-researched, and untainted by a reporter's opinion. To put it another way, they want their news straight up. But too often now, that's not what they're getting, and they know it. I'm frequently asked, can the news be fixed? The answer is yes. But the first step to fixing a problem is admitting that we have one. Until we do that, nothing can change. I'm Sharyl Attkisson for Prager University.
If credibility is the lifeblood of journalism, the mainstream media is dead. It wasn't killed by competition from the internet. It committed suicide. We know the approximate date of its demise, 2016. We know the cause, the abandonment of objectivity. We even know the method of the suicide, the full participation in a conspiracy to destroy a political candidate and then, ultimately, his presidency. This is not only my judgment, it's the judgment of the most prestigious publication in the field of journalism, the Columbia Journalism Review. In January of 2023, the review published a 26,000-word, four-part investigation into the conspiracy commonly known as Russiagate. It was written by Jeff Gerth, a highly regarded former New York Times reporter with decades of experience. Gerth concluded that every major claim in the Russiagate narrative was false. Let's step back and consider what this means. For some 5 years, the mainstream media, the New York Times, Washington Post, ABC, CBS, NBC, CNN, fed a grotesque lie to the public that Donald Trump colluded with Russia to subvert an American election. We're talking about dozens of news organizations and hundreds of reporters working in concert to spread fictitious claims in thousands upon thousands of news articles, TV segments, podcasts, and opinion pieces. Given Gerth's reputation and that of the Columbia Journalism Review, the article should have been front-page news and led every TV news program. It didn't. Given Gerth's conclusions, you would expect the media would engage in serious soul-searching. It didn't. The media that acted as the stenographer of the conspiracy simply ignored Gerth's report. In short, they lied, and then covered up their lies with silence. Even Gerth, a veteran newsman, was shocked. Only about a dozen out of the 60 journalists he reached out to spoke to him. As Gerth describes it, not a single major news organization made available a newsroom leader to talk about their coverage. One can only wonder what these newsroom leaders would have told him. The picture that emerges from Gerth's investigation is a morass of malfeasance, greased by naked ambition and ideological bias. This list of offenses is so voluminous and so far outside the lanes of accepted journalistic practice that they're hard to keep track of. Here are just a few. The so-called Steele dossier, with its lurid accusations that Donald Trump had close ties to Vladimir Putin and Russian intelligence, was a collection of unsourced fabrications cut and pasted together by a Trump-hating former British spy working for and paid by the Hillary Clinton campaign. It was complete fiction. The story that the Trump Organization was secretly connected to computers at a Russian financial institution called Alpha Bank, another complete fiction. This one concocted by Clinton campaign lawyers. The accusation that Carter Page and George Papadopoulos, early and peripheral foreign policy advisors to the Trump campaign, were Russian agents, complete fiction. Maybe even worse were how these fictions were often peddled to the public. Working with the FBI or some other government entity, the media would publish an accusation of Trump-Russia collusion. The FBI would then look into the story. The media would report the FBI's curiosity and suggest that if the FBI was interested, there must be something to it. Sometimes it would work the other way around. The FBI or some other government entity would feed spurious information to the media, and the media, citing anonymous government sources to add a flavor of credibility, would report it. In either direction, the insinuation was the same. Where there is smoke, there must be fire. But there wasn't any smoke, and there wasn't any fire. Did the media believe its own lies? It's hard to know. If sheer volume is any indication, they certainly acted like they did. Gerth reports there were 533,000 articles published about Russia and Trump during just the 22 months of Special Counsel Robert Mueller's investigation into Trump's alleged involvement with Russia. And then they congratulated themselves for their efforts. The New York Times and Washington Post were awarded Pulitzer Prizes for their Russiagate reporting. Now that we know that much of that reporting was poorly sourced, rarely checked, and sometimes just made up, have the Times or the Post returned their prizes? Of course not. Journalism is no longer about gathering the facts and presenting an accurate picture of reality. It's about choosing sides. This is the opposite of journalism. It's political warfare, scorched earth activism masquerading as journalism. Ironically, the only Trump-era collusion that has been proven was between the mainstream media, the Hillary Clinton campaign, the Democratic Party, and elements within government agencies. Together, they did more to sow discord among Americans than Russia could have ever dreamed of doing on its own. For the better part of a decade, the media invested all of its credibility in advancing the claim that Trump colluded with Russia to steal an election. That credibility is now gone. So where do we find the truth? Not from the mainstream media. It's dead. It killed itself. I'm Ashley Rindsburg, author of The Gray Lady Winked, How the New York Times Misreporting, Distortions, and Fabrications Radically Alter History for Prager University. Thank you for watching this video. To keep PragerU videos free, please consider making a tax-deductible donation.